Simon, welcome to the Wade Champions. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great. We were just catching up about your somewhat recent trip to the state of Oregon and everything. You did mention it was in, I think, February, which is usually the rainy season in a lot of the state.
Yeah, I actually came over thinking it'll be glorious in Oregon, and it was 2 or 3 degrees Celsius, and it rained the whole time.
Yeah, yep, that's that side of the mountains. I live on the other side of the mountains, which tends to be a lot sunnier. So, I I hear you. But I mean, you're from York, the north of England, so a little gray and drizzle is not something brand new.
No, I went from rain and drizzle to rain and drizzle. I felt perfectly at home.
Awesome. Well, just tell our listeners a little bit about Be World Class and the work you do before we sort of dive into some of the topics that I'm super interested to discuss with you today.
Sure. I often kick off when I speak to audiences by saying my background is sports psychology. But the big caveat is that sports psychology has always been human psychology. I thought of it as sports psychology because I started doing it with athletes and sports teams. But the truth is, what works for athletes and sports teams works with anybody. These are really generic human principles. And I started getting really interested, particularly when I was working in elite sport in the Olympic programs, really interested to understand what differentiates the very best in the world.
Mm.
I was working with squads of swimmers, track and field athletes, the cyclists, all sorts. And there were some in those squads who were genuinely in the best in the world, and many who weren't. And I noticed it wasn't pure talent that differentiated them. And it wasn't some of those things that classically we think will differentiate people. So I became really interested to understand what makes the difference, what creates that edge for world-class performers. And my curiosity over the years has spiraled from individual performers through teams, through leaders to organizations. How do people sustain high performance for, in some case, decades? That's really what fuels me. And I spend my time researching and studying it, but also sharing it with my clients so that they can adopt those principles themselves.
Brilliant. Awesome. When you use the word talent, I immediately went to I have a friend in the UK named Stuart Armstrong who's worked for UK coaching and Sport England and all that. And
Mm,
he talks about he's got a podcast called The Talent Equation because what he says is sort of this idea that ability is what we see, but talent is that ability, right? The genetics and the strength and the speed combined with what we might call these psychological characteristics, the grit, the resilience, the respect, whatever, determination. I mean, all these words, all these things that you've probably discovered in your career as well. And so, yeah, just a little thought on that. Like, I think we throw around the word talent when a lot of times when we mean ability and talent to get to that level is not just, no one's ever handed just some genetic freakishness that lets them get there. Once you get to that world class level, it's usually not ability that separates the best.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what many people working at the very, very highest levels have found over the
Mhm.
years. And there are some elements that we're born with, of course. I remember watching my eldest daughter when she was, I think, maybe 6, 7 years old, and she loved playing cricket. She got into cricket really early, and at about 9 or 10 years old, one of the coaches said, "Wow, she's super talented." And what they meant was that she's got this almost sort of genetic ability to play cricket. She was
Mhm.
born with this innate ability to play cricket. And I said, "No, no, what you're watching there, what you're seeing is that she found a passion very early
Mhm.
and she's followed it."
Mhm.
So by the age of 9 or 10, she'd probably thrown and caught more balls than most of the girls around her. She'd
Yeah.
hit more balls with a bat than most of the girls around her. She bowled more because that's what she wanted to do. She'd do it out in the back garden. She'd do it for hours.
Yeah.
And people confuse that with this innate, natural, inbuilt,
Right.
almost kind of God-given talent, quote unquote, that
Mhm.
we might have. And that's the bit that I think we often need to separate because I also I believe that the vast majority of people could be great at something.
Yeah.
Now, if you're 6'10", that might be basketball. If you're 2'10", that might be horse racing.
Hmm.
So, our genetics dictate maybe what we could be great at, but not necessarily the level that we can get to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's almost like it's your ceiling, right? Because you can't out train being 5'6" and wanting to be a basketball player. Like no amount of practice is going to change that that's how tall you're going to be.
Mm.
But a lot of practice can determine how you make up for maybe being shorter than people. And I think your story of your daughter is spot on because we see that all the time, and it's just like no, you have a practice, you have an accumulated hours of training in cricket or football or hockey or whatever it is more than most people your age. But it's also especially dangerous. And I don't know how many younger athletes you work with, but when we label kids with that when they're really young, before they've hit puberty, before they've grown, right? And then all of a sudden people catch up or move on who maybe were handed a better genetic card. And they really struggle with that as well because they've always been identified as special and you were good for nine, but good for nine and elite are not the same thing.
Yeah. And if you look at many, many youth programs, the kids who excel at 12, 13 years old don't necessarily go on to be the senior international athletes.
Right.
And some of it's about maturation, and some of it's about just they started earlier and then others catch up. But actually, some of it's to do with things like work ethic.
Yeah.
I think those kids who naturally find it easy really struggle when they, particularly when they get towards the higher levels and they get older, because they didn't really need the work ethic. They
Exactly.
just turned up and they were just good.
Yeah.
And other kids had to really work at it. And
Yeah.
because they worked at it, they developed this sort of other dimension, which then allowed them to progress further.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's actually it. It was interesting. We had a guy on the podcast named Greg Olson, was very well known in the States, a 14-year NFL player, all pro. Now he's a broadcaster. But anyway, he said he's a big advocate in youth sports, and he said those really, ones that are shining when they're young, you got to coach them harder. Because those are the
Mhm.
hardest kids to coach because it's so easy for them to skate, to
Yeah,
just give a little bit less because I can still be the best. He's like, those are the hardest ones to coach. And it was interesting to think about it that way because usually we think, oh, the kid who's not getting it is hard. But no, it's the kid who really gets it. And we are still trying to align their behaviors with what's going to promote their long-term development, not just how do I get by in this training session today or how do I score 3 goals on this week on the weekend, right?
that's right. I can remember having a quite bizarre conversation. I started working with England squash, and I was having a conversation with the performance analyst and the performance director. Both of them were steeped in squash, and I knew nothing about squash. I was very open about that.
Yeah.
We were talking about which of our female players potentially could become a world number one.
Hmm.
At the time, one of those players was a world number three, another was a world number five, and another one was a world number eight. And they were arguing between them, but
Hmm.
whether it was the world number three or the world number five who was going to make it to the top. One of them was probably more athletic. Um, Movement skills were better. She was quicker. She was more agile. The other one probably had better racket skills
Yeah.
and more guile, as they described it. And I said, no, I think it'll be the world number eight. And they looked at me and they said, yeah, that's because you know nothing about squash.
Uh-huh.
And then after a while, they said, interestingly, why did you say that she might make it?
Yeah.
I said, well, work ethic, character, resilience, determination. I said, I've put them through a series of challenges. And when I look at their response to the challenges, she's always coming out on top. So if I had to put my money on anyone, I'd put my money on her.
Hmm.
Fast forward on a few years, she's the world number one.
Yeah. And you were rehired.
Yeah, and I wish we'd had that beer 10 years on.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right? I wish you recorded that conversation.
That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
but that's really interesting, right? And we're starting to see more research in this area, right? I know, in the UK, Dave Collins, he calls it like the PCDEs, the psychological characteristics of developing excellence, I believe. And
Yeah.
this guy Joe Baker in Canada, who's done a lot of work on in this area as well. Like, what are the psychological characteristics that are the greatest predictors of long-term success when all else, but and because these are a lot of these are things that you can control, right? You can control your
Mm,
hours of practice, you can control these psychological things to an extent. You can't control the genetics you were born with. You can't control where you were born, which obviously determines a lot of it and your access to resources and stuff for at least for a while. But if we look at these psychological characteristics of skills that can be developed, then these are important. And so, what are in your journey? What are a couple of them that stand out? Like you've mentioned a couple, but just maybe let's break down what each one means. When you
mm.
looked at that number 8 ranked player, what was it about her that you said that's a far greater predictor than how she's playing today? And she's young. It's not like she's 38 and you're like, she's young. Yeah.
Sure. One of those things that when I've worked across sports, particularly when we're trying to predict or recruit athletes at a young level to go on to performance programs, we're often looking for players who, we'll call it, own their own development.
Mm-hmm.
They are they're aware, self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
They can understand their own game. They know what they need to work on. They will work on it regardless of whether there's a coach standing next to them or not. Now, these players are driving their own development, and they're taking responsibility for their own development. Um, I can remember many years ago, this was 2006, and London had just secured the 2012 Olympic Games.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asked, because I was a part of an organization called the English Institute of Sport.
Mm-hmm.
We provided sports science support programs to the England teams, the GB programs. Um, I was asked, how can we predict those athletes who could stand on a podium in 6 years' time?
Right.
And of course, that means that we're looking at 13, 14, 15-year-olds today who
Mm-hmm.
might become podium
Mm-hmm.
athletes in their late teens or early 20s. The other challenge, of course, is that you're looking at squads of hundreds of athletes at that
Mm-hmm.
age. So, who could make it to the podium? And I started asking the coaches, particularly those who had worked with champion athletes, what were they like when they were 13, 14, 15 years old?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they said really interestingly is there's one thing that you cannot rely on at that age, and that's the stopwatch.
Mm-hmm.
It will not tell you. It'll only tell you about maturation and who's quickest today. It's not going to tell you who's got the potential. So we started talking about those kinds of characteristics. And one of them is that they can own their own development. So I started to test this with some of the athletes that I was working with. I was working with some swimmers. So I would sit by the door of the swimming pool as they walked in at probably 6 o'clock in the morning. It's cold and dark and raining in the UK outside at 6 o'clock in the morning. And as they walked in, I would ask them what they were working on. And one morning I remember, first athlete walks in. I said, "What are you working on today?" He said, "I don't know."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay, bye. See you later." Second athlete walks in. I said, "What are you working on today?" And he said, "I'm going to work on turns."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay, why turns?" Well, last few weekends we've had some competitions. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not.
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Last weekend I came into the wall in first place and I left in fifth.
Yeah.
So I need to work on my turns." I said, "Okay, see you later." And then I would just sit back and watch them.
Yeah.
And you can tell the difference between an athlete who's going through the motions and one that's actually working on their game.
Yeah.
I mean, they were both told to swim, for example, 400 meters. They'll both swim 400 meters, but
Right.
how is the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And then as they left, I would say to both of them, "How did it go today?" One would say, "All right." And the
Yeah.
other one would say, "Okay, they're better, and I've
Yeah.
learned something." And then they'd tell me that they'd learned all about the approach into the wall, how their last stroke made such a difference. So if they took their last stroke too late, they didn't have enough space between them and the wall to get their legs over properly, and they couldn't land their feet properly.
Yeah.
And if they took the last stroke too early, they lost all the momentum, and they'd learned about it. And I'd say, okay, great, cool, see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the next morning, I'd ask them the same question. First athlete, what are you working on today? Don't know. The second one looked at me like I was a bit of an idiot and said, still turns?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now I'm starting to get the picture
Yeah.
as to who's got the potential really, who could stand on that podium. So owning their own development is, I think, one of those real cornerstones.
Yeah. And then the cornerstone of that, right, is I think as you just described, the word that we would use in psychology, right? Like deliberate practice, like some very
Mm,
focused, specific, measurable way to know did I get better today versus did I just spend 3 hours in the pool or 2 hours on the field or whatever it is.
yeah, and particularly that they can do that without relying on a coach. The coach is a great resource for them. They'll
Right.
squeeze every ounce of benefit from a coach they possibly can, but if the coach isn't there, they don't stop. They
Yeah.
don't stop learning, developing, becoming better.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's coupled with that, so responsibility is critical, but curiosity is also
Hmm.
really important.
Hmm.
Being curious about how do I get quicker? How do I get stronger? How do I move better? How do I control this ball better? Whatever it happens to be. Because that then guides every moment that they spend when they're practicing.
Yeah. 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 And how do you make it a little bit more measurable, right? Like, okay, I don't know what the number would be. 100 turns in swimming today, and I think
Mhm.
I nailed 50 of them. Tomorrow I want to get 55, right? I want to do
Yeah.
that. So it's like I'm getting because I know in the Olympics I have to nail every one or I'm not going to win.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
And this actually, with the technology that we've got today, it becomes easier and easier to do that. But we
right.
can we can if we chunk things down, we can give ourselves little targets and start to measure our progress.
Yeah.
Um, Often I'll work with golfers who, when we start, we'll go out on the driving range and they'll just hit 100 balls. And then I'll
You're now
say,
you're starting to describe me. Go ahead.
what are we doing with those 100 balls? What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to get better at?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to become more consistent. Okay, so did that 100 balls help you become more consistent? Well, probably not. No. Okay, so what are we looking to do then? Let's if you want to be more accurate, more consistent, let's break the fairway down into thirds.
Yeah.
Do you want to hit right third, middle third, left third of the fairway?
I just like to hit the fairway.
Yeah, I think most golfers would. And and then we can start working out exactly what we're trying to do with this practice session.
Hmm. Hmm.
Can you do it with each of the clubs? Can you do it into different winds? How can you control this now? Um, so that's where we start to get really intentional.
Yeah.
Deliberate practice, intentional practice. What are we trying to do? How are we trying to improve? And honestly, a lot of people in life, never mind athletes, don't have a clear understanding about that. So they end up plateauing. They get
Yeah.
to a certain level and their progress curve just flattens off.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend who's a very high level coach, works with some of the household names, Ryder Cup golfers, everything. And he talks about that. Like, how do you break down your practice? Because then, like you said, a lot of golfers will go out there and just practice for 9 hours and hit balls with no rhyme or reason, but he's like, well, okay, of your shots, right? How many of them are putts? What percentage of your shots are putts? What percentage are chips and 100 yards and in? What percentage are this? Like, that's how you should break down your practice time, right?
Mm.
And so you get used to that 4 or 5 hours, but like very deliberate within that. And then what percentage of your putts are 10 feet and in and what percentage are longer. We'll break down that. And when you start thinking about that versus I practiced 9 hours versus I spent 40 minutes on, downhill putts within 10 feet, who's going to get better?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And those who are really good at this, they're also constantly upping the challenge,
Yeah.
constantly increasing the challenge. One of the athletes I worked with years ago was a rugby player.
Yeah.
Now, he played for England. He was one of England's best players of all time, a
Hmm.
guy called Johnny Wilkinson.
Yeah.
And I watched him with his kicking practice.
Yeah.
He would set himself a target. So he's kicking out of hand and he's kicking the ball towards the corner of the field, and he needs it not to go across the try line, but go into touch next to the
Hmm.
corner flag. So he would put a little target of cones out. He would kick the ball right foot and left foot. And he always had a little rule that he had to hit 20 consecutively. And if he got to 19 and missed one, he'd go back to zero and start again.
Wow. Yeah.
So he kicked these balls. And then as soon as he got to his 20, he'd make the target smaller.
Wow.
And then he'd do it again.
Wow.
And then he'd up the challenge even further. He'd get somebody to pass him the ball. I can remember one day he said, can you pass me the ball? I said, yeah, I can, but do you not want me to go and get like a scrum half, professional player to pass you the ball because
Yeah.
they'll do it better. He said, no, I want bad passes. I said, oh, thanks, Johnny.
Perfect.
Yeah, I want them too short, too long, too close to me, too far away, too fast, too slow, too high, too low. He said,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just because I want to pick them off my toes and
Hmm.
be able to kick it. I was like,
Mm.
okay, yeah, I'll throw you the ball. Then he'd get somebody to run at him whilst he's doing it, so that now
Yeah.
he's under time and space pressure, and he's got somebody coming out of the corner of his eye.
Yeah.
And he'd start them 10 yards away, then he'd start them 5 yards away.
Yeah.
And all the time he's making this more and more and more challenging, and
Yeah.
he's challenging himself to execute that skill. Um, uh, a tighter skill, a tighter target to hit under more time and space pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the way that he elevates his game.
Yeah, and just think about how different that practice is than most. You know, the basketball player Steph Curry, he was very famous when he was growing up from a very young age. He wouldn't leave the court. The last thing he would do, he had to swish 10 free throws in a row, not make, swish
Yeah,
them, no rim, no
yeah,
nothing,
yeah.
right? And he wouldn't leave until he swished 10 every
Mhm.
single day, right? And so it's that attention to perfection accumulated over time. Now, how do you not cross? How does the Johnny Wilkinson or the Steph Curry not cross the line into unhealthy obsession on your off days? And so the Johnny Wilkinson story dovetail or doesn't dovetail, but I heard Dan Carter, the All Black rugby player, talk about in his journal, his practice journal, when he would do his, I think his was maybe try kicking or, tries or whatever, but he was like, he would do 10 a day or 20 a day, and that was it. And he's
Mm.
like, if I made all 20, I went home. If I missed 10 of them, I went home because I knew I was doing 20 again tomorrow. Right.
Yeah.
So, like, it was also balanced with, I know I'm going to do them again. So I don't, if I'm just having a really tough day, I'll be back tomorrow. And so I think that's
Mm.
where people can get into this unhealthy perfectionism versus this strive for perfect that's maybe healthy, like Johnny Wilkinson. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and actually, very openly, Johnny will say he really struggled with perfectionism
I've heard him talk about
and an
that. Yeah.
obsession. Yeah,
Yeah.
um, and I think that the really elite mindset can lead you to be brilliant, but also, if you're not careful, miserable
Yeah.
in combination. And I think that I had a conversation with a friend recently about a will to win. And there are lots of reasons why you might want to win. Some people, it's because they've got what I would call the barking dog over their shoulder. It's that fear of failure. It's the fear that they're going to let other people down. But it's a negative driver.
Yeah.
Some people are driven by curiosity, by passion, and that's a very, very different driver.
Yeah.
So I think the reason why you do it is critical,
Yeah.
as well as doing it. The reason why you do it, the reason why you want to win is critical.
Hmm.
And there are I know quite a lot of Olympians who have done really well. They've won gold medals, world championships, they've been world record breakers. And when you sort of dig down, it's an innate fear of letting their parents down, something like that that's driven them on.
Hmm.
I remember Tiger Woods' story, people like that.
Yeah.
They actually didn't really enjoy what they did.
Hmm. Andre
Um,
Agassi was a big one.
Andre Agassi, perfect example, yeah.
Mm.
And then you compare those to somebody like Roger Federer,
Yeah.
who probably would be playing if he could into his 60s because he just wants to play tennis.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He just wants to keep hitting that ball as well as he can.
Yeah.
I remember listening to Ian Thorpe,
Yeah.
the legendary Australian swimmer,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd won pretty much everything there was to win, broken every record there was to break. And he was asked why he still swam, and he said, "I know I'll never do it, but I just want to swim the perfect race."
Yeah.
And these are people that reluctantly retire because they know that at some point you have to, because when you're 86, you probably won't be doing this anymore, but they just love it. I remember asking a triathlete, an Olympic triathlete, who'd again won pretty much everything there was to win, Olympic
Mm.
medals and broken records. And I said, "What will you do when you finish being a competitive triathlete?" And he said, "I'll probably cycle over the hills. I'll be swimming across a lake somewhere. I'll be going for a run. I'll probably have an extra piece of cake when I get to the other side because I'm not
Yeah.
a competitive triathlete, but I just want to swim, bike, and run. That's it."
Yeah. 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 And so I mean, this is all so important because this mindset, like what I always come back to is, and I do a lot of work in the youth space, and a parent will ask me, well, what does it take for my kid, to do this? And it's like these people that you just described, they're unicorns. They're so rare. The combination of ability and mindset to be world class is such a rare thing. And most people I feel like don't know what it looks like, right? They
Mm,
don't know what it is, so they just think that, oh, because they want it, and maybe their kid likes to practice a lot now and play a lot of cricket or play a lot of soccer, that their kid's on this path. But I've been lucky enough to be around some of these people like you, and they're not normal. And I don't mean that in a
mm.
bad way. It's just this drive, this focus is not like other people their age if they're 14 or 15 or 16. They have this goal, and it's almost like
Mm.
in your role, you have to like manage that drive with also trying to help them not lose their humanity in it all. I
Yeah,
mean, would you agree? I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
yeah. Uh, One of the cricketers that I worked with, he was for a while the world's number one batsman,
yeah,
captained his country, incredibly good player. He talked a lot about his relationship with the game, is how he described it,
yeah,
and that he needed a healthy relationship with the game.
yeah,
Going back to our point, he needed to be playing it for the right reasons.
yeah,
And this is something that I think can really challenge people because it can change over time. Going back to youth athletes, I remember watching my girls when they were 3 and 4 years old. We took them to gymnastics and dancing and all the things that they wanted to do at the time.
hmm,
Um, they started. If I think about their reason for starting it, they just wanted to test their body and find out what it could do. There was this
hmm,
really exciting sensation of being upside down, of rolling around, of doing a cartwheel, of flying through the air. That's what they wanted to do. And then somebody said to them, "Oh, we're having a competition. Ah, interesting. I wonder how that will change the dynamic.
yeah,
And there's a prize at the end of it."
yeah,
And I remember that first time where there was a trophy, there was ribbons to be won, whatever. And I thought, as a parent here, my reaction is going to be quite influential. It's going to really dictate what my girls experience.
uh-huh,
If if my reaction, if they come back with a medal, is to go, "Wow, yeah, brilliant," and if they don't come back with a medal, to look disappointed, "Oh, never mind,"
yeah,
that's going to tell them that winning a medal pleases Daddy,
yeah,
but if I don't, he's upset. So I need to go and win medals. And it changes from I just want to test my body and be upside down and experience what the world's like when you're doing a cartwheel
Yeah.
to I need to win a medal because dot dot dot.
Yeah.
And you can see how it compounds through a child's life
Yeah.
because it first of all I want to make mummy and daddy happy. If I win enough medals, they put me up at the front of the school and everybody claps me,
Right.
and I get handed another prize. I get recognized,
Hmm.
and then my identity gets built around this thing. And this is the thing I'm good at. This is how I become successful. This is how I make people happy. It takes on another dimension and possibly not a healthy one. I mean,
Yeah.
that could lead us in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And it's the same when athletes make it in the professional ranks. They get noticed. They're on social media. They're on TV. They're getting adulation. They're getting paid. Handsome sums of money often.
Yeah.
It could start to morph away from that sort of intrinsic reason why they were doing it in the first place, that almost pure reason,
Yeah.
into something else.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to
no, I was
interrupt.
going to say, and I can remember a conversation with a hurdler
Yeah.
where she'd been competing at a championships in a big stadium full of people. She'd come over the last hurdle, she clipped it, tripped up, landed on her nose just before the finish line. She was in first place before she tripped, landed on her nose. Every other athlete finished and went past her. She got herself up off the deck and crawled across last.
Right.
And it was screwing her motivation up. She wasn't sure why she was doing it anymore. She didn't want to. She didn't see the point in it. And as she was describing all of this, I said, just for interest, tell me what it feels like when you hit top speed.
Right.
And her facial expression changed, her body lit up, and she said, "Oh, it's amazing."
Mm.
I said, "Ah, interesting." And she'd lost that understanding of why she did this thing in the first place.
Yeah.
It had got, I would describe it as being a little jewel that was up in the attic somewhere and
Yeah.
covered in junk.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that was the reason that she started the sport, and that's what she really loved about it. And I
Yeah.
said, you've talked about you don't want to train anymore. Do you want to just run at top speed?
Yeah.
Like run with the wind in your hair? Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's just do that. Yeah.
Let's
I
let's
love
go
it.
back to that and start there.
I love it.
And if you could still do that in a stadium full of people and just be wanting to hit that top speed, what would the experience be like? Would you still want to do that? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd want to do that.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, I think it's such a powerful lifelong narrative, right? Because like that, I just want to hit top speed goes back to your 4-year-old. I just want to do a flip and see what it feels like,
Yeah,
right? Like it's the same thing. And then as we go, and I think your story is amazing, right? As soon as we introduce competition, the child's reaction to that, and then again, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with competition. I love to compete. I love to do that stuff. But like you said, the adult reaction to that can really determine the path of is this where I get my validation only by winning from mom and dad or not? And also it's like when kids realize or think it matters so much to mom and dad, that's when they start to cheat, right?
yeah,
Because winning's the only thing that matters because that's where my love comes from. And it's just then it's this dangerous downhill spiral of
yeah.
do anything to win.
And that's what the cricketer was talking about, the relationship with the game, the relationship with competition. What's
Yep.
my relationship with this? And the important element of it is that we choose our relationship with it.
Yeah. 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 There's a author, Brad Stulberg, and he has this book called Master of Change, and he tells a story in there of I think it's a Norwegian speed skater, Olympic champion, world champion, and I do not know the guy's name, but he said his shift came from, where he was doing really well, and then in the big competitions, he would just crack. And then he shifted his training to said, from Monday to Friday, I'm going to be a world-class speed skater. And on Saturday and Sunday, I'm gonna go to watch music and hang out with my friends and play the guitar and whatever. And the
Mm.
way he described it, and I've used this because I think it's very relevant to athletes and people I know of, he said, think of it as a a house with many rooms. And you can spend a lot of time in this one room, the elite athlete pathway, but you can't lock the door to all the other rooms. You have to be able to go pick up a guitar, to have friends and family, to have this, because when you get injured, when you get cut, when things go south, if all the other doors are locked and the one room that's open isn't working anymore, that's when people depression and fall off there. And I think that's just a really interesting analogy. Is spend a lot of time in this room, but make sure you have the keys to the other one.
Yeah. There are, I think, a very, very small percentage of athletes and people in life who can function by being utterly single-mindedly focused on one thing.
Yeah.
Probably the Michael Phelps of the world
Yeah.
can, and it works for them. But for the majority of people, we have to have a broader base in life and a broader base to our identity. We have to know ourselves as people before our profession, our athletic identity.
Yeah.
Um, because when it all goes wrong, the problem is if life equals sport and sport equals life, and sport's going wrong, life's going wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And very quickly things can go south.
Right.
And our stability comes from our understanding that we are not the sport. The sport is not us. We are not defined by it.
Right.
We win, great, wonderful. We lose, hey, it's a sport. We'll try, we'll learn, we'll practice, we'll get better, we'll go again.
Yeah. Yeah. And in any sport, failure is a part of it, right? You want to be a PGA golfer, even if you're today, if you're Scotty Scheffler, you're still going to lose 85% of the tournaments you enter, right?
Yeah,
If you want to be, again, as Roger Federer said in his amazing graduation speech at Dartmouth, he still only won 52% of the points in his life. He lost
yeah,
48% of the points. Like
yeah,
there's
yeah,
there's such just that ability to done and what's next. And so you said something before which I wrote down is that the elite mindset can lead you to be brilliant or to be miserable. And this is what we've just been describing here is that for the ones who make it, we go, oh, great. Even though, and maybe they have the fame and the support and the money afterwards to deal with the fallout, but most people don't make it, right?
mm,
So the person with that mindset that can lead them to be miserable, that then gets their third concussion at 17 and can't play anymore, those are the ones that we never hear about that so if I'm the parent of this kid and I see all these characteristics and this single-minded drive and all that, what do I do? How do I support?
yeah. It's something that I've noticed has become, fortunately, a far, far bigger focus within junior athletic development programs.
Yeah.
It's understanding that we're developing players, sure, but we're developing people. First and foremost, we're developing people because we know that 90 plus percent of them won't make it to the senior professional ranks. Statistics tell us within soccer academies in Europe, 99% won't make it.
Right.
So on that basis, we've got to just for our own conscience, I think we've got to know that whether you are part of the 1% or the 99%, we've served you.
Mm-hmm.
We've equipped you to be successful in life.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that, most of the development that we can give you isn't related to kicking a football.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we get the other bit right and we develop you as a person, that'll help you kick a football.
Yeah.
And within lots of the programs that I've worked in, we talk about, even on the coaching side, within one of the cricket programs, we said we coach people first and cricket second.
Yeah.
That's what we do here. We coach people.
Yeah.
and we coach people to be better people.
Yeah. And better
And
people
in doing
make
so,
better
they'll
cricketers, we hope.
there you go. We'll
Yeah.
we'll catch a ball better, we'll hit it better, we'll throw it better. Yeah, all of that. But fundamentally, we need to make sure that whoever leaves here, whether it's because they get injured, whether it's because they get cut, or maybe they fall out of love with the sport, what doesn't matter. We
Hmm.
can look ourselves in the eye, shake them by the hand, and say, we've really helped you along your path in life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so important that that shift has happened and is happening because even with that focus, there's still when you've been single-minded in your pursuit of rugby or football or whatever, and it doesn't work out, it's still going to be hard. And in that moment, that's when we really have to help them sort of transition to that next phase. Or even the Olympian at 26 who's not making the Olympics anymore. And I just had a podcast with two former Olympians, Ashton Eaton, who won the decathlon gold in London and Rio, who's
Mm.
from where I live, and and then Mexican swimmer who, didn't make it to the final pool, right? But has swum in two Olympics as well and had a great career. Um, and I had met him sort of in this like, what do I do next? He was a month and a half after Paris. And he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm like, you need to meet Ashton and we're going to record it. Because one of the things that Ashton said, he's like, he transitioned into this business world and I look around me and everyone's 10 years ahead of me. And I'm
Mm.
feeling like, oh my God, like what is this? Never mind the fact that I'm not on the Wheaties box and I'm not on TV and whatever. He said, but
Mhm.
it's really interesting. The things that you learn as an athlete, like, are skills that are in high demand as a human being in the rest of the world in the workforce. And he said, one of the craziest things, he goes, I go into my boss and I'm like, what can I do? How can I get better? Whatever. And the boss is like freaked out because he's like, no one else asked me that. No one else wants to be coached.
Yeah.
So it's really important. But yeah, like what does that parent do along this journey to just support their child because these same characteristics that might make them great also might make them
Well,
a sociopath.
yeah, I think the characteristics that will make them great, if we go back to curiosity combined with uh, taking real responsibility, owning your own development, those things, if you translate those out into any walk of life, they're going to help you become great.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is difficult is finding a new passion to attach all of this to.
Mm.
Because if we go back to the kids who are 3, 4, 5 years old and they take up gymnastics because they want to roll around on the floor or be upside down or hit top speed, whatever it was that they latched onto. At the age of 20 something or 30 something, when they go out there into the big wide world and they're not an athlete anymore, can they just find something
Yeah.
that grabs them in the same way? Maybe not.
Yeah.
What I remember talking to one of the Olympians I worked with for many, many years. He and I worked together for 7 or 8 years. And he describes how when he was in the water as a swimmer, he just loved being in the water. He just he loved the feel of moving through the water. He wanted to master being able to move through the water better. Even when he was a senior Olympic athlete, um, his warm up, he would go and sit on the bottom of the pool
Mhm.
to be really connected with the water. He was always curious about how he used his paddles, as he calls them, to manipulate himself and maneuver himself through the water. It was central to him. And then,
Yeah.
of course, he can't swim competitively. He still swims, but not
Yeah.
competitively. Um, but he's got to find something else that grabs him in the same way, that sparks his curiosity in the same way,
Yeah.
a,
Yeah.
a purpose and a passion. And that I think is one of the difficult bits.
Yeah.
Because it won't just necessarily butt up to the end of your athletic career. You won't sort of finish your athletic career 1 minute and the next morning you wake up and you're super passionate about something else. That's unlikely to happen. But I think one of the things we can do, going back to what you were talking about, having a broader sense of who you are, having things outside of sport, being able to explore things that you might be interested in whilst you're still competing, I think is really healthy.
Yeah. And that, I mean, I think that's such that purpose, finding something that you are passionate about and gives you purpose beyond winning, right, is the key. One of the coolest things I did some coach education for a nonprofit here in the US called Soldiers to Sidelines. And, it's the same thing. You have people who are soldiers or firefighters or police officers, right? And they have this great purpose and you just use the broad term, this brotherhood, this togetherness, feeling like the things I do today mean something. And then they leave that and they feel lost. And so this nonprofit was getting them into sports coaching because because coaching gives you like this sense of purpose when you're doing it the right way and you're developing human beings and all this sort of stuff. And I just thought it was such a cool idea. And I think this is why so many athletes go into coaching because they don't quite want to leave that locker room. And
Mm.
the ones who stick with it feel like, oh yeah, this is the purpose that I'm missing.
Yeah, and one of the things I've learned about passion, people talk about finding passion, but I'm not sure that's the right way to look at it or the best way to look at it. I think of passion like a fire, which starts with a spark.
Yeah.
And if we feed that spark with fuel and oxygen, that can become a flame. Not a big one to start with, it'll become a little flame.
Yeah.
But if we keep feeding it with oxygen and fuel, it'll become a bigger and bigger and bigger flame, and then it'll become a fire.
Yeah.
And if we keep doing it, it'll become a raging inferno.
Yeah.
And that's how passion in my experience develops. It doesn't, it's not, that's how it developed when we were 4, 5 years old. We didn't love gymnastics. We loved rolling around on the floor. And then we also loved cartwheeling. And then we also loved standing on our head. And then we also loved doing a backflip and a somersault. And, it grew. And that's the way that I think passion does grow.
Yeah.
So giving people an opportunity to experiment with a few things, start to grow their passions in certain areas, find something that they go, oh, that I want to keep doing that, not because I need to or because I need a job or I need some money or whatever. I just want to keep following that path
Yeah.
because it intrigues me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so critical. What about well, I would go back maybe one last point is like that kid who is tumbling and then you introduce competition and they go, no, I don't want to do that. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with your kid either.
Mm,
Like I think that like I think of my own children, they had this wonderful, wonderful piano teacher. She was amazing. She's still a friend when they were young. But her school of piano or the part she was with, the kids had to keep taking piano, let's call them piano tests,
yeah.
right? And you had to go and get move up to this next level and move up to this next level. And neither of my kids wanted to do that. They just wanted
Hmm.
to play piano.
Yeah.
And I look at their experience versus my brother, who's still a musician today, who had a piano teacher, and this is, 40 years ago. So, he would record a cassette tape of a song, and then if my brother didn't practice it, he would go, "Oh, it was the wrong song. Let's learn another one." You're right. And there was never took a test, never did anything, never got tested on reading music, just
Mm,
love music, right? And those two paths, my kids still dabble in music, but they never fell in love with piano because it was about this upcoming evaluation. They just wanted to
yeah.
play.
Yeah. Do you know, and when I look at that, sports coaching is often not different.
Yeah,
Sports coaching's got the same structure around it often.
100%. Yeah.
I look at it and I think that's not for the player or the pianist. That's for the teacher or the coach
Yeah,
because
exactly.
we want it neat and tidy.
Yeah.
We want a system through which we can progress people. And we're not ready for it to be too chaotic. We're not ready for people to make their own minds up. We need them to just follow our system, please, because that's easier for us.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
maybe it's not right for everybody.
And what I've noticed, to go back to how does mom and dad or coach react to the competition or how you did or just the importance of it. Okay, now today we're serious, right? I've talked to so many people in every sport on this podcast about, if you run a youth sports club and if I turn Friday into free play Fridays, pick up, just pick up, just show up, we'll make teams and play. The participation rate is so much lower than if I say it's skills training Friday. Come learn more skills, right? Now, why is it that kids all of a sudden don't value play and value getting better on Fridays? It's not because most of them are this elite driven mindset. It's because that's what their parents value. And so we have a whole generation of kids that don't value free play, don't know how to sort it out because they've been told that that's not serious.
Yeah. And actually, if we dig under the skin, I remember being asked to work with a golfer who was a decent enough player, good handicap. He was 18 years old. Um, and his father asked me, can you work with him? He wants to be a professional. And a couple of weeks in, I went back and I said, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And I said to the golfer, as he was sitting in front of me, I said, do you want to be a professional? He kind of went, yeah, that's your answer. I
Hmm.
said, you want him to be a professional. That's
Hmm.
your dream for him. That's not his dream. He's
Right.
doing it because that's what you want. And
Right.
he kind of hasn't got anything else competing with it at the moment. He hasn't got another dream that's overriding it. So he's sort of just going with this one.
Yeah.
He doesn't really want it.
Yeah. I found, and I'm curious to hear your experience in 30 years of coaching and having coached numerous children of professional athletes or Olympic athletes or gold medalists or whatever. Um, in my experience, the majority of those parents are much more mellow with their own kids because they understand what it takes and realize that their kid just might not be that kid, right?
Mm.
That it's just maybe life's a little more comfortable because they grown up with more money or more resources, maybe because they just realize that not every person is willing to give up so much in pursuit of this thing, and I'm okay with my kid not being that. And it's funny to watch them on the sideline, just mellow, enjoying the fact that their kid's out there, and then the parent who's never done anything in sport, living and dying with any moment, and they never look over and go, "Why are you parenting that way?" And you've done this.
Yeah.
Is that your experience at all, or?
Yeah, there are a lot of parents who are vicariously living through their kids' success because they never really had any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And those who have had it don't need their kids to do it because they've already got their own achievement. They don't need to borrow their kids' achievement or live through their kids' achievements.
yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of those. And you're right, they never, I think, stop to ask why. And it really does go back to if we ask that question, so okay, winning's important, but why?
Yeah.
Why is winning important? Why is it important that your kid wins today? Well, yeah, let's dig under the skin of that one. It might
Yeah.
be uncomfortable, but it's really worth asking and answering that question honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Or on, May 14th, 3 years ago, when that day when you got so worked up about that bad ref, what was the score?
Mm,
You don't know because it didn't matter. It
yeah,
didn't matter.
yeah. We can see the same often in youth coaches. Why is the coach so bothered about winning? Because honestly, if we think about what our primary role is, if we've got a team of 14, 15-year-olds, the primary role today probably isn't to win, it's to develop these human
Mm.
beings.
Hmm.
And not just as athletes or players, but as human beings.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even if we take player, let's make sure we don't forget that the word play exists within player
Yeah.
because we want them to be playing.
Yeah.
I work with um, top level football teams who put players out onto the field in front of 70,000 fans. They're they're ultimately they're after trophies, sometimes the highest level trophies.
Yeah.
We still want those players to play
Yeah.
when they're on the field. And there should be an element of play that's just like they had when they were 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old.
And that's when they're at their best.
Yeah,
That's
completely.
when they're at their best, loving you. That's why it's so easy to play when you're up 4 goals because, it's like this mistake isn't the end of the world, which usually they're not.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much, right, scrutiny on that athlete today in front of 70,000 people because fans have direct access to your inbox,
Mm,
right? On Twitter, any Instagram, any social media, right? We have racial abuse, you know, gender abuse, whatever it is, right? Homophobic abuse. It's like, but so today's athlete really has to deal with that. And then you have the some who are like, no, I don't have an account because I don't want to. And then their agent's like, yeah, but that's where we're going to make all your extra money and your endorsements and whatever. And so it's this double-edged sword of like, I need to be there for my life beyond football, but when I'm there during football, all these people who don't know me, don't know what I do, don't know anything, it's very hard not to value their opinion that I was shite today.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much around players that could stop them playing. From all of the elements that you've just described to the coach with too much strategy and
Mm,
overthinking to fear of failure to all of that can
mm.
stop people from just going and playing. And it sort of echoes, I think, a larger challenge in life, that challenge to be yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many pressures on people that almost almost force us not to be ourselves.
Hmm.
That being yourself ends up being quite a big challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and then as the coach, which we really didn't even get a lot into today, how do you create this sense of true belonging where where you can, you know, I can make mistakes. I can, I know that my teammates have my back in my difficult moments and not just my good moments. I know that my coach does as well, because that's when I can perform my very best, right? Fans
Yeah.
are fickle, right?
Mm.
You have a bad play, I want you out. That's a fan. But a coach, right, is about that love and genuine relationship and connection to your athlete, and then hopefully my team as well, so that's when my potential can actually shine through.
Yeah. There's a friend of mine played very high level rugby, played internationally. He then, after his rugby career, went on to fly commercial jets.
Yeah.
So he captained the A380 for
Uh-huh.
Emirates. And he talks about the environments, both aviation and elite sport, being very demanding, challenging environments.
Yeah.
Um, and he said high challenge requires, as he would call it, fierce challenge requires fierce care. You have to have fierce care first, and
Yeah.
not light care, not even moderate care, but real fierce care because
Yeah.
the challenge is fierce.
Yeah.
You have to know that people care for you as a human, not just you as a number 10 on the field,
Mhm.
not just you in your role,
Yeah.
but for you as a person.
Yeah.
Um, and that deep love and care gives people that feeling of safety. We can
Yeah.
also culturally wrap some understanding around this that another friend of mine played rugby for Scotland and then coached in the UK, the one of the most successful teams in the UK. And he said we differentiate the errors there are skill errors and there are effort errors.
Hmm.
A skill error is you tried it, it didn't work. The
Yeah.
effort area is it was you weren't trying really hard enough. It was the effort that let you down, or you've made the same mistake and you didn't practice it. That's an effort error. And he said, we will never pull somebody up for a skill error because
Right.
we want them to try things. We
Yeah.
want them to be creative. We want them to take a risk occasionally. Um, so that sort of stuff, we'll just say, hey, we are encouraging you to do that.
Right.
We're not
Yeah.
going to berate you for doing it. We encourage you to do that stuff. And actually, if you weren't doing it, we'd say, hey, why not? Why not? Why didn't you try? It could have been there. There was an opportunity.
Yeah.
I remember listening to Dan Carter, the All Blacks, saying that was very much a part of their environment. Um, if it was on, if there was an opportunity, they want you to try and take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You
if it
you were
goes wrong,
letting
it
your
goes
teammate
wrong.
down when you didn't try to take it, when you didn't take.
That's it.
Yeah.
If you were too conservative and
Yeah.
didn't look for the opportunities, because within anything, and this is something I learned from working with entrepreneurs, there's always a risk of doing something.
Right.
Their question is, what's the risk of not doing it?
Yeah. Phew. And how powerful is that idea? I love that. This is a great way to kind of bring it to a close. Or we could go on forever. But Simon, you are the author of 10 books. Any that you want to kind of highlight here? If people were listening to some of this, that you might say, okay, yeah, this is a good one if you really liked what we talked about today.
Yeah, there's there's one about challenge. And many years ago, I took on some pretty daft challenges myself. The point was to learn what I call the conversation between your ears
Yeah.
when you take on really tough challenges. And I wrote my experiences into a book called Could I Do That?
Yeah. Huh.
Um, that might be quite a good start point, I think, if anybody's enjoyed this conversation.
Gotcha. Awesome. That was cool. Others, How to Shine, Stronger Together, How to Develop Character. We'll put links in the show notes to everything. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you and follow your work and stuff?
So if you Google Simon Hartley Be World Class, hopefully you should find me.
Hmm.
You should find the YouTube channel, which is / at Simon Hartley.
Uh-huh.
And that'll give you a fairly good sort of lead in to some of the resources that I've shared, some of the ideas that I've shared and the concepts and things that have worked for me in my line of work that hopefully will work for other people too.
Awesome. Well, this was a really wonderful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I always feel like the best ones are when it's like sitting around having a pint or a coffee with someone, and it just flows naturally. So we truly appreciate you being on the Way of Champions and sharing some great insight and knowledge of how to be world class and how not to lose yourself in the process as well. So, Simon, thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening. Thanks to Simon Hartley again. A great conversation at Simon Hartley on YouTube. His website is b-world-class.com, bworldclass.com with a dash between each word. It's all in the show notes as well. Thank you to our friends and sponsor at Sprocket Sports. Thanks to our Patreon podcast champions and our premium members who make this podcast possible. Uh, that was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed that. Just this idea that elite mindset um, can make you brilliant or it can blow you up. And how do we manage those things? How do we navigate walking on that edge so that you don't tip over it, especially if you get injured or get cut or lose your contract or whatever? How do you stay human? Right? And how it's not sports psychology, it's human psychology. It's developing people, whether you're chasing a sales goal or chasing a goal on the soccer pitch, it's still just people. It's still people. Also love just this idea of being very mindful as a parent of what is your reaction to all of a sudden the introduction of competition and winning and losing. and how your children feed off that. And then just at the end, this idea of fierce care, right? An environment with fierce love and care and relationships is the one where people thrive. Okay. So thanks again. Um, Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing this. If you get a moment, leave us a review. Share this with your coaches. Share this with an athlete who you think needs to hear this message, or their parents as well. Just that's the best thank you ever can get. All right. Whatever you do, if you do any of those things, your influence is positive because it's never neutral. Whenever you walk into a room, you're going to leave a mark. So be mindful of it and use it for good. Make a positive difference this week. We'll see you again next week, everybody.